Have you ever imagined spending a night in the heart of a raging snowstorm with no shelter, no fire, and nothing but the frozen earth beneath you? Picture the Great Plains in winter, a place where the wind slices through the darkness like a living blade, where the air itself becomes a weapon. On nights like these, the temperature may read 20 degrees below zero, but the wind turns it into the deadly feel of -40. Out there, the cold does not simply surround you, it hunts you. Every gust steals warmth from your skin. Every breath carries tiny crystals of ice that sting like sand. For most of us, facing a night like that with no protection would mean surrender. But for the indigenous peoples of North America, this was not a nightmare or a rare accident. It was a reality they understood, a challenge they met with knowledge sharpened over thousands of years. And what might seem impossible to us today was part of a refined system, a way of reading the land that began long before the first snowflake touched the earth. They did not simply survive the storm, they understood it. They moved with it. They knew how the wind shifted before a blizzard, how the sky turned a sickly yellow at sunset, and how the world grew strangely quiet when pressure dropped. They recognized every warning as if the land itself was speaking. In this journey, you will learn how these communities transformed snow into shelter, how they used their own bodies as a collective source of heat, and how they carried an inner philosophy that allowed them to endure nights that would defeat even modern travelers. Stay with this story until the end, because what you're about to hear is not just survival. It is ancient intelligence. It is human resilience carved into ice and wind. When a winter storm formed on the horizon, the true danger was not the cold itself, but the wind that carried it. To the indigenous peoples of the Great Plains and the Subarctic, wind was more than moving air. It was a force that shaped life. It could turn a survivable night into a deadly one by stripping warmth from the body faster than any fire could restore it. Long before modern weather forecasts, they learned to read the wind the way others read books, understanding its shifts, its moods, and its warnings. A sudden change in direction before sunset, a gust that became sharp and restless, or a strange stillness that settled over the land were all signals that a storm was gathering strength somewhere beyond the horizon. They studied the sky with the same attention. Thin, feathery clouds stretching across the upper atmosphere slowly thickened into a gray curtain, a sign that a snow front was pushing in. Sometimes the sunset turned an unnatural shade of yellow or a dull copper, glowing in a way that made even experienced hunters uneasy. And then there was the silence. Before a blizzard arrived, the air often became crystal clear. Sounds traveled far, footsteps, voices, even the crack of distant ice. It was as if the world were holding its breath. That eerie calm was a message that the pressure was dropping and the storm was preparing to fall. But what set these communities apart was not only their ability to read nature, but their relationship with it. They did not see the storm as an enemy to defeat. They saw it as part of the living world, something to respect and respond to rather than fear. Children were taught from an early age that panic clouded judgment. When lost in the forest or caught in sudden whiteout conditions, they were taught to stop, breathe slowly, listen to the land, and observe before acting. This discipline, this quietness of mind, was a survival skill just as important as fire or fur. So, when the first signs appeared, the group moved as one. No shouting, no disorder, just calm preparation. They gathered materials, adjusted their clothing, and changed their route if needed. Their strength came from knowledge and from the belief that storms are temporary, but wisdom endures. Once the first signs of a storm were clear, the next battle began. Finding the right place to face the night. Out on the Great Plains, it might seem as if the world is nothing but endless, flat emptiness. But to the indigenous peoples who lived there for generations, the land was full of subtle shapes and hidden clues. They knew that even a gentle dip in the earth, a low ridge, or a cluster of tall grasses could mean the difference between a freezing death and a survivable night. What looked empty to outsiders was, in truth, a map of possibilities. The first rule was simple. Never stay on the highest ground. The tops of hills were punished by the fiercest winds. Instead, They moved toward the leeward side of a slope, the side protected from the gusts. Even a drop of 1 meter in the terrain was enough to soften the wind's bite. Dry stream beds, known today as coulees, were especially valuable. These shallow ravines offered natural walls against the storm, but they carried their own risk. If the blizzard was strong enough, snow could fill the entire ravine. So the group settled on the upper side of it, high enough to avoid being buried but low enough to escape the direct blast of the wind. When the land provided no natural relief, they created their own. They knew exactly where wind piled snow into dense drifts, and these drifts became their building material. The moment a suitable spot was found, they moved quickly. Using hands, sticks, or whatever tools they carried, they dug a shallow trench just deep enough for the group to huddle inside. Every handful of snow removed from the trench was thrown onto the windward side, forming a low wall. It did not need to be tall, it only needed to disrupt the airflow. A simple ridge of snow, barely reaching a person's waist, could force the wind to rise above them instead of cutting through their bodies. This basic shift in aerodynamics could save lives. Inside the trench, the world felt strangely transformed. The roar of the wind faded, replaced by a muffled hum. Snow became their shield, the earth their foundation. Now the focus shifted to preparing the ground beneath them, because the frozen soil was just as dangerous as the storm itself. And that next step, creating a bed that could protect them from the cold below, was an art of survival all its own. Inside the shallow trench, the storm raged above like a living creature. But down below there was a brief moment of calm, and in that narrow window, the real work began. The indigenous peoples understood something that seems almost contradictory to the modern mind. The very thing trying to freeze you can also keep you warm. Snow, for all its cruelty, is one of nature's best insulators. Nearly 90% of freshly fallen snow is air trapped between tiny crystals, and that trapped air can hold warmth far better than bare ground or exposed wind. The challenge was knowing how to use it. On the Great Plains, the wind rarely allowed snow to stay soft and fluffy. Instead, it packed the snow into dense layers known as fern. Fern was not ideal for insulation, but it was perfect for construction. Once the trench was dug, every chunk of fern became a building block. The group pushed these blocks onto the windward side, forming a curved barrier like the beginning of a protective shell. Even a small wall could bend the storm's force upward, creating a pocket of stillness where breath no longer crystallized instantly in the air. Farther north, among the Cree and the Athabascan peoples, this knowledge evolved into a true craft, the building of the quinsy. A quinsy began with a simple action gathering snow into a mound. The snow was stomped, pressed, and shaped until it formed a compact dome. Then it was left to rest, sometimes for an hour, sometimes 2. During this quiet waiting, the snow set, its crystals locking together into a hardened shell. Only then did the builders begin to hollow it from the inside, carving a smooth cave with their hands or antler tools. A well-built quinsy could be 20 to 30 degrees warmer than the air outside, a miracle carved from nothing but frozen water. Inside, a faint blue glow filtered through the walls, giving the space a calm, otherworldly light. But even the best walls and finest domes meant nothing if the ground stole your heat. Frozen earth is a silent predator, pulling warmth from the body faster than any wind. So the next step was critical, building the bed. Pine or spruce branches were the first layer, laid thick 20 to 30 centimeters deep to trap air and lift the body away from the ice. Where trees were scarce, they used dry grasses or wormwood, whose stiff stems held shape and whose scent was sharp and comforting in the cold. On top of this plant layer came hides, then fur laid with the hair facing downward to create even more pockets of insulating air. Only with this foundation could a person lie down and hope to survive the night. Snow became their walls. The land became their floor. Knowledge, patient, practiced, and precise became their only true shelter. With the shelter built and the bed prepared, one final challenge remained, creating enough warmth to last through the long, frozen night. And this was where the indigenous peoples of the Plains and Subarctic revealed one of their greatest survival arts, something modern people often overlook: the power of the human body itself. A single person, no matter how strong, could lose heat faster than they could make it, but a group of people, working together, became a living furnace. They arranged themselves carefully, lying on their sides in a curved line, each person's chest against the back of the next in what we now call the spoon position. There was no personal space, no separation. Warmth flowed from body to body like a shared heartbeat. The strongest individuals took the outer edges, shielding the group from the cold that pushed against the hides above them. Those more vulnerable, the elderly, the young, or the injured, were placed in the center where heat collected most efficiently. And throughout the night, there was rotation. Someone starting to freeze on the outside would quietly move inward, while another, already warmed, took their place. It was a living, breathing system of mutual protection. Above them, bison hides or other heavy furs were spread out and overlapped to form a single massive blanket. The weight of the skins pressed gently downward, trapping the warm air rising from dozens of bodies. Under that dome, the temperature climbed, sometimes enough to make breath feel thick and the air slightly humid. The storm roared outside, but beneath the hides, the group became its own microclimate, a warm pocket carved out of the winter night. But even this shared warmth required fuel. That fuel came not from fire, but from food, specifically pemmican, one of the most ingenious survival foods ever created. Made from dried powdered meat mixed with rendered fat and sometimes dried berries, pemmican was incredibly dense in calories, lightweight, and long-lasting. Eating a handful before lying down was like throwing a heavy log onto an internal fire. The body immediately began converting the fat into heat, sustaining metabolism through the dangerous hours when sleep could easily drift into hypothermia. Hydration mattered too. In the bitter cold, moisture left the body with every breath, yet all water nearby was locked in ice, and eating snow was forbidden. Melting it in the mouth consumed precious heat and lowered body temperature. Instead, snow was packed into small leather bags and tucked under clothing, letting body heat melt it slowly. The resulting warm water was sipped carefully, enough to keep the heart strong and the mind clear. Together, these practices shared heat, powerful food, and careful hydration formed a complete system. It was not just survival, it was cooperation, discipline, and a deep understanding of how the human body and the natural world could work together against the cold. Through the howl of the storm, through the darkness and the frozen wind, the survival of indigenous peoples was never a miracle. It was the result of a complete, interconnected system of knowledge, one built not in books or laboratories, but in countless winters spent listening to the land. They read the sky like a story, felt the wind like a warning, recognized the shape of the earth as if it were part of their own memory. They transformed snow into walls, branches into mattresses, and their own bodies into a shared source of warmth. They understood that staying alive required more than tools or strength. It required humility, awareness, and trust in one another. While modern humans rely on technology to predict storms or shield ourselves from the cold, these communities carried their wisdom within them. They didn't wait for danger to arrive. They anticipated it, prepared for it, and worked together to face it. Where we might see an empty plain or a merciless blizzard, they saw resources, shelter, and patterns left by generations before them. Their survival techniques were not simply practical, they were reflections of a worldview that treated nature as a companion, not an adversary. And so, as we look back on these methods, we are reminded of something deeper. We are reminded that the human spirit was shaped in places far harsher than the ones we live in today. We are reminded that cooperation is more powerful than isolation, and we are reminded that even in the coldest night, warmth can come from knowledge, from courage, and from the presence of others. Which of these ancient techniques surprised you the most? Was it turning snow into a shelter, creating inner fire with pemmican, or the art of sleeping together as one? Share your thoughts, suggest the next topic you want to explore, and stay with us as we continue uncovering the forgotten wisdom of the ancient world.